Now let's take another example of SSRF. In this case, this website is going to tell us whether or not a website is accessible. So if I type in something like google.com, it's going to come back and say, hey, this website is accessible and I can actually get a hold of it. So let's try another random website. We're going to do example.com, just another one to see if it works. Website is up, sure enough. But now we want to see if we can exploit this in any way where it could be a potential port scan, SSRF, blind SSRF, or whatever else. So the first step we want to do is we can verify that this is actually vulnerable. You can either do this with your Netcat or you can use Burp Suite Collaborator. I'm going to just have it on the Collaborate client. Just makes it easier for me for the sake of this example. Again, you can use your own server, you can use a Netcat, whatever that is. And we're just going to send this request out. It says website is up. So that should probably get a request right here to tell us that we did get a request from this server into our collaborator. So we can confirm that, hey, this does make a server-side request. The IP address that it's coming from is from the remote server and not our own browser and computer. So the next thing we want to do here is we want to see if we have access to localhost. You can do this either by typing in localhost or the IP address for it. So I'm going to try this. It comes back and says, hey, only URLs are allowed. So we can't really type in any IP addresses. I'm going to just go ahead and try localhost. It says the same thing. But let's see if we can trick this into working. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to serve localhost and ask for port 80, which comes back surprisingly and breaks the logic on this app and says, hey, the website is up. And we can make sure this is invalid by giving it a random port. 81, unlikely for it to be open on this server. I'm going to go ahead and hit. It says request failed. So now we know that we can actually hit a local service like localhost or any other IP addresses that are around it, and we are able to communicate with it back and forth. So now the next thing we want to do is we want to see if it actually allows us to port scan. So one of the most common ports that is usually open on a server, again, this depends on your target, but in a lot of cases, port 22 is used for SSH. That's how they access the server. We're going to try and see if this comes back and give us anything. And if we do that, it comes back and gives us a different error. It's not saying, hey, the website is not up. So let's try, for example, localhost 81 again, which was an invalid port. It doesn't say request failed. It says, hey, I don't recognize this as an HTTP request, but something is coming back, which is giving us a different error where it indicates that, hey, this port may be actually open. We can try and do another port like 8000. Again, request failed. What about port 25? Request failed. So we can pretty much port scan and understand how many ports and what exact ports are open on this box based on the errors that we get. So again, if I do port 22, I get a different error. It indicates that something is coming back. It's not the response that the server was expecting, but is yielding another error for us that indicates, hey, there's something fishy happening here, and shows us that there is actually a valid open port, and we can use that as a proof of concept to tell the company that, hey, not only this has giving us access to a local network, but it also allows us to port scan, but we can't really see the content of any of these ports, but we can actually see that port 443 and 22 for localhost are open. In this case, we don't have access to any other IP addresses, but let's say if we could access some random local IP, we could do the same thing. So if you think there are other IP addresses, within this private network, you can do the same thing by giving it the IP address, port 22, and seeing what comes back. And of course, if it comes back with request failed, then we can kind of assume that this IP address is not up and we don't have access to it, or there are no open ports. There are no open ports on it.